verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book, the power of God seen in the pages of Scripture through the Bible. Acts 25 verse 1. Now when Festus had come to the province, after 3 days he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest, note, Ananias had been removed from office by this time by Agrippa. And the chief men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him, asking a favour against him, that he would summon him to Jerusalem while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. Upon Roman Governor Porcius Festus arriving in the province of Judea, the first thing he would have done was receive a comprehensive briefing on all the matters of consequence under his new jurisdiction. 3 days spent in Caesarea, the port city of Jerusalem, and favoured location of the Gentile rulers. Now rested and fully briefed, Festus heads to Jerusalem, the Jewish capital, in the Judean hill country. The way Luke records these matters, it seems the Jews prioritised the petitioning of Paul, under the pretext of finalising the legal limbo of a prisoner named Paul, by calling for him to be brought before their Sanhedrin. But their primary plan to murder Paul by ambush is revealed by Luke in the text. Their first contact with Festus would be to conspire against the authority of both the new governor and Rome itself. They were intending to strike before Festus knew firsthand how twisted and evil they really were, dressed in their righteous-looking religious clothes. Butter wouldn't melt in their mouths. However, Festus had danced in the courts of crooked men before. Verse 4. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept in Caesarea, and that he himself was going there shortly. Festus quickly felt the wicked chill in the Judean hills, surrounded now as he was by Jews with ice in their veins. I'll be heading back to the port city of Caesarea in the lowland plains, enjoying the gentle Mediterranean sea breezes. Verse 5. Therefore he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse this man to see if there is any fault in him. And when he had remained among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, the Bema, he commanded Paul to be brought. 10 days spent in Jerusalem, being more fully briefed on all the issues of state in Judea, the squabbles, the petty concerns blown into major issues. By the time these 10 days were complete, Festus would have been itching to get away from these troubling Jews. Governing Judea was the bottom of the pile of Roman provinces to oversee. This Jewish people thought they were better than the Romans, and they were a perpetual source of troubles and disturbances. Within a handful of years, the Jewish province would descend into open rebellion against Rome. Verse 7. When he had come, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood about and laid many serious complaints against Paul, which they could not prove, while he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar, have I offended in anything at all. But Festus wanted to do the Jews a favour, answered Paul and said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem, and there be judged before me concerning these things? Clearly evidenced in the narrative, you can see the politics interfering with the judicial system. Felix's governorship had failed as his relationship with the Jews broke down. Festus had learned from Felix's errors. It was plain to see Paul was not guilty. At very least, there certainly was no evidence to convict Paul of any crime. The Roman procurator Festus sat in the judgment seat at Caesarea, heard the evidence, and could see Paul was innocent. Yet being newly appointed, sought to curry favour with the Sadducean elements of the Jewish hierarchy. Now consider Paul's perspective. 2 years a political prisoner, guilty of no crime. He sat before now 2 Roman judges, both hearing his case, both knowing he was innocent. And now, so that Paul can be some pawn in the local game of politics, he's offered the chance for a 3rd trial. Only this time, the trial was to take place in the jurisdiction of his chief enemies, who want him dead. Essentially, the very same people who set up a kangaroo court and killed Jesus. Verse 10. So Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews, I have done no wrong, as you very well know. For if I am an offender, or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. But if there is nothing in these charges of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, You have appealed to Caesar. To Caesar you shall go. 2 years in prison, 2 Roman governors, 2 Roman trials with no evidence against him, 2 chances Paul would go to Jerusalem, Buckley's and none. Paul's done with justice in Judea. All Festus was required to do in this trial was his job: hear the evidence, present his ruling. But politicking interfered with his responsibilities, just as it had with Governor Felix. If Festus did what was right and let Paul go, sure, he'd cop some flack from the Sadducees, but he'd cop that anyway. They hated Romans. Once again, Paul takes an unexpected approach. Paul was an enigma to them, a man of continual surprises. By appealing to Caesar, he squashes the plans of Festus and the plotting of the Jews. He's also placed Festus in a very embarrassing position. He'll have to send Paul to Rome for trial without valid charges. The pride of Festus does not allow him to take a step back and simply declare Paul not guilty and release him. Verse 13. And after some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. When they had been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, There is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem, asking for a judgment against him. In the last chapter, we were introduced to the beautiful Drusilla from the Herodian clan. Well, this King Agrippa and Bernice are the brother and sister of Drusilla. All 3 of these siblings had heard stories of the Jesus movement, tales of miracles and magic, signs and wonders accompanying this new religious way. Numerous of their ancestors had been involved with killing important members of this movement. They would have all grown up hearing reports of these passionate Jesus people and their powerful preaching. Just like their sister Drusilla, Agrippa and Bernice would also be drawn to the Apostle Paul like a moth to flame. Festus and Agrippa seemed to get on like a house on fire. Both men enjoyed the hatred and contempt of the religious Jews, so they had that at least in common. And after many days of growing friendship, eventually Festus shares his lamentations regarding his latest legal problem. This is all Felix's fault, your sister's husband. Felix left this innocent Jesus preacher called Paul in prison as a favour to the Jews. What was I supposed to do? Is effectively Festus's gripe. He seeks to bring Agrippa into this drama to spread the blame around. The way Festus presents the case is telling. The Jews asked for a judgment against Paul. They didn't ask for justice. They asked for a guilty judgment. The implication being a guilty judgment against an innocent man. The wording of Festus is a self-condemnation of his judicial partiality. Verse 16. To them I answered, It is not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face, and has opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him. Therefore, when they had come together without any delay the next day, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion, and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. Once again, Festus demonstrates the very human ability to recount a series of events to reflect favourably upon the reteller. He leaves out any detail that makes him look bad and emphasises those things which reflect well on him. The way he tells it, Festus is as innocent as a lamb. But notice, even with his doctored retelling of events, he actually declares Paul totally innocent. And in declaring the innocence of Paul, he's documenting his own guilt. The one thing Festus gets 100% right is Paul's witness about a certain Jesus resurrected from the dead. Clearly, Festus had not paid close enough attention to the briefings he received about the major happenings in Judea. Any governor of Judea who was not informed on this now 3 decades old Jesus movement was technically inept. Yet Festus seems surprised this entire Jewish controversy centred around a resurrected Hebrew Messiah. Verse 20. And because I was uncertain of such things, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. Festus is trying on the woe is me defence. I just wanted to cover all matters of uncertainty, of which he's already declared by his own witness there was none. Paul was not guilty. There were not even valid charges against him. Verse 21. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. Agrippa knew there was deeper politics playing out. A real friend would have said, since you found Paul innocent, rather than the trouble of sending him to Rome without charges, just let him go. But Agrippa, just like his sister Drusilla, was drawn to the legend of Paul, the chief disciple of the Jesus movement. And Festus was happy to draw in another ruler with friends in high places in Rome. If the charge sheet against Paul sent to Rome included the name King Agrippa, this would alleviate some focus of Festus. Verse 23. So the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice had come with great pomp and had entered the auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city, at Festus's command Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all the men who are here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. So, I hope the scene is well pictured in your mind. A massive auditorium filled with the rich and famous men of the city, and Agrippa, Bernice, and Festus all arriving at the scene to much pomp and ceremony. Picture trumpets blasting, drums beating, professional heralds declaring the greatness and exploits of Agrippa and Festus. I personally imagine this scene taking place at the theatre of Caesarea, built by Herod the Great, a location that still exists today, overlooking the sea. The amphitheatre arranged in semicircular fashion. The prestigious location where all the great shows and performances took place. And this show from Paul will be one of the greatest ever performed. Verse 25. But when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. I have nothing certain to write to my Lord concerning him. Therefore, I brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the examination has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to specify the charges against him. With these closing words, the dilemma of Festus is well documented. Paul, an innocent man that Festus should have let go, was being held prisoner as a political favour to the Jews. Paul, a Roman citizen, remember, guilty of no crime, held for 2 years in prison. How's that going to look in Rome? Paul, in desperation, was forced to appeal to Rome to remove himself from Festus's dominion of injustice. Though now Festus doesn't even have a charge against Paul to accompany him to Rome. Festus realises how bad this is going to make him look in Rome. He's hoping against hope this latest public hearing will give him some justification for sending Paul to Rome. And we'll pick up in our next study to do a deeper dive into the Herodian clan. Then we'll hear from Paul as he gives witness in the auditorium. But in chapter 26, Paul will unexpectedly turn all eyes and attention upon King Agrippa. Until then, may God richly bless you all.